Hey, what's going on, everyone? It is Josh Guerrero here, and welcome to the All Around Adventure Podcast. Whether you're joining me for the first time or you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, I certainly do want to welcome you here. And as always, I want to thank you for being here today, just because I know that you're busy and that you have a lot going on. And there's also a lot out there on the internet these days that's trying to get your attention, but it just means so much to me that you've chosen to download and listen to this podcast. Now, if you are in fact new to this podcast and you're not entirely sure what we're all about here, this is the show where you hear amazing tales from afar and get the all-important life lessons that go along with them. Those will, of course, be stories from myself, as well as the amazing guests that I welcome on this podcast. Though in this episode, you just have me today. This is a solo cast. I don't really have a fancy name for the solo cast like I used to in the past. I guess this is just simply the solo show now, I'd suppose. And like I said, I'm just going to be sharing my own stories, my own thoughts, my own ideas. Hopefully give you something that you can extrapolate and apply into your own life once you're done listening to this episode. And I usually don't make these solo casts too terribly long, just maybe about 10 to 15 minutes or so. Sometimes, depending on the topic, I may go a little bit longer than that. But I just want to give you something to chew on as you go into your week. And like I said, I hope that what I share in today's episode you will find beneficial and can apply it into your own life when you're done listening to it. So with that, let's go ahead and get into today's topic. And you notice that the title of this episode is Warriors Are Greater Than Fighters. And what do I mean by that? And I have my own thoughts, my own opinions, but this idea for this topic came from a quote that I heard not too long ago. And I want to share that with you all now. And this is a quote from Heraclitus. He said, "Out of every 100 men, 10 shouldn't even be there." And by there, he's referring to combat. 80 are just targets, 9 are the real fighters, and we are lucky to have them, for they make the battle. But the one is the warrior, and he will bring the others back. So clearly he's referring to that there is a distinction between fighters and the warrior. And that's what I want to talk about today. And of course, I'm not sure exactly what Heraclitus, what distinctions he was making between the two, just by this quote alone, but I'm going to go by what I think and just kind of some of the stuff that I've observed throughout my own life and some of my own experiences. And y'all can take from it what you will. Again, this is just my story, my own thoughts, and let's see what we can take from them. So I don't really talk about this a whole lot, but back in the day, back in my early 20s, when I was an undergrad in college, I was part of my local MMA scene. I trained at a very reputable school. A lot of local champions were a part of my school, and I trained alongside with them. And I noticed that there was a few different ways that certain fighters went about handling their wins. More often than not, like after a fighter had a fight during a particular event, he would usually take a little bit of time off, relax, maybe pig out on some food, probably gain a little bit of weight. But then once he had another fight lined up, maybe about like 8 to 12 weeks out, he will then kind of sort of dial things back in, undergo a rigorous training camp, get his weight down, try to up his technique, get his conditioning under control before stepping in the cage for his next fight. However, there was different behavior that I observed for those that actually had won titles, again, in this particular like local circuit. And that is that they didn't really take a whole lot of time off, or any time off at all for that matter, after they won a fight. Like they didn't really rest on their laurels. They didn't take it easy for a while. They got right back into the gym, sometimes as early as even the next day, and they started preparing for their next fight, even if they didn't even know when their next fight was going to be. They didn't have anything lined up specifically on the horizon, but they knew that another battle was imminent at some point in the future, and so they immediately started preparing for that next fight. And I think that's really what the biggest distinction is in this case when I think about warriors instead of fighters. Fighters are very skilled, they're very capable and everything like that. However, I just feel like what separates the warriors from just the fighters is that the warriors are just willing to do that little bit extra, willing to do what most will not. And there's a couple of other great examples with some professional athletes that I've observed who exhibit behaviors like this that I think kind of gives them that warrior mindset and also those warrior habits, if you will. A great example is Michael Jordan. Like Michael Jordan, of course, he was a very, very skilled basketball player. He really brought his best foot forward when it came to practicing with the team. But he also did a lot of stuff outside of practice, too, to help give him an edge on the basketball court. He underwent a lot of strength training, which not only added to his already great athletic ability, but in many ways, it also made him an imposing figure on the court when he had more muscle mass. And that kind of it allowed him to sort of wage psychological warfare amongst the opponents on the teams that the Bulls were playing against, just because, he comes barreling down the court with a bigger build and things along those lines too. And sometimes he was even doing his workouts on actual game days too. But just all that extra work that he was willing to put into perfecting his craft, is it any wonder why the man was a champion and that he goes down in history as one of the greatest basketball players of all time? Another great example of this when it comes to professional athletes is UFC welterweight champion Georges St-Pierre. I remember a particular fight that he had when he was defending his welterweight title against Dan Hardy. Now, he dominated that entire fight, and he was like 100% successful in all of his takedown attempts. And he got Hardy in some pretty wicked looking submissions. However, he wasn't able to bring Hardy to tap. And although Georges St-Pierre won that night and he successfully defended his title, it bothered him that he wasn't able to finish the fight, to get those submissions and to get Hardy to tap. So again, instead of just resting on his laurels and then, of course, also celebrating that he won and defended his title, there was footage of him back in his locker room, and he was working with his coaches. They were reviewing the tape, and he was working his arm bars with his coaches, trying to figure out why couldn't he get Hardy to tap in that moment. So even though, like I said, he won the fight that night and defended his title, he didn't rest on his laurels. He went right back to training, trying to figure out what he can do to plug these holes that he just identified in his game. And again, he was just willing to do those extra things to try to make himself better. And again, is it any wonder why the man was a champion? So how can we apply this warrior mindset using examples like this in our own lives just as well too? And I think, I've already mentioned it, is that as we're not resting on our laurels whenever we achieve something great. Maybe you set off to pursue some sort of educational endeavors, and maybe you make it to like a very, very high degree level, like a master's degree or a PhD. Do you stop learning from there? Or is your pursuit are you going to pursue being a lifelong student, recognizing that there's always things that you can learn? Sometimes I see this a lot with a lot of PhDs I know, where they make it to the pinnacle of structured education and they think that there's nothing left for them to learn, so they kind of stay stagnant. And even though industries are always changing, there's always something new to learn, especially as technology is evolving at such a fast rate. I certainly have observed this in archaeology a few times with a couple of PhDs, and I'm not going to name any of them to throw them under the bus here. But yeah, they think they have nothing else left to learn. Where one of my mentors, a man that I respect greatly, even after 40 years of doing the profession, working as an archaeologist, achieving a PhD, having done so much in his career, he actually kind of felt bummed that he was about to retire because he felt like there was still so much that he could learn about his profession. And that's why I respected him so greatly, just having that humility, knowing that he could always improve and get better. Of course, that now we're talking about a professional sense here and an educational sense, but what about in a business sense too? Maybe you hit a record month in sales in your business. Do you just taper off from there? Do you just rest easy and, now that you've made it to this peak, this high goal, this new record, or are you going to push to try to set an even higher record the next month and the next month and so on and so forth? And what about in your role as a parent or a husband or a wife? It's just, I said this thing on Daniel Hickman's podcast, the Competitive Edge podcast, which will be coming out a little bit later than the release of this episode. But one of the things that I said about the topic of parenting or being a husband, father, is that we retire from those jobs in death. So it's always going to be a lifelong pursuit of showing up in those areas and trying to work on getting better in those areas until the day that we die. Or like I said, just in death, which I will hope that it's going to be from in my case, my own versus like those that I have care over. And that's just really what I want to talk about today. And that's what I think is like one of the deciding factors between having a warrior mindset, having a fighter mindset. Like the fighter mindset, you could obviously you can recognize being very capable and able to do a lot of amazing things. But the warrior mindset is that despite what you may achieve, you're willing to put in that extra work to keep improving, not resting on your laurels, and having the humility to understand that you can always improve and you can always get better, and taking those actions to keep on getting better. All right, everyone, that's all I have to say in this episode. Again, I hope you've found it beneficial. If you did enjoy today's episode, be sure to let me know and head over to Instagram and connect with me over there. My handle is @allaroundadventure. That is a platform that I'm most active. And I don't ask it a whole lot, but I'm going to ask it today. If you didn't get value out of today's episode, head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you might be tuning into this podcast. Hit 5 stars, leave us a good rating and review, and that way that'll help the algorithm get the show out to more people so more people can get some value from it just like you have. All right, everyone, thank you very much for tuning in yet again, and be sure to check in next Monday when I release a brand new episode featuring another fantastic guest. And until then, have a fantastic week. I'm Josh Guerrero, and I will see you all next time.